This story is titled, My Cousin Falsely Accused Me at Christmas and My Entire Family Disowned Me for 10 Years. When she finally confessed, I didn't forgive her. I hired a lawyer, found the proof, and took her to trial so everyone could watch. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Story Zone. Before we start, subscribe button right now because this one is going to stay with you for a long time. Some stories are about getting even. Some are about getting closure. This one is about something rarer and more satisfying than either of those things. This is about a man who waited 10 years, found every single piece of proof that existed, refused every offer to make it quiet, and stood in a courtroom and made sure the whole world could see exactly what had been done to him. Let's get into it. OP starts by saying, I want to start with a warning. Not because this story is graphic, and not because it's particularly complicated. I want to warn you because it's long, and it's heavy, and some parts of it are going to make you angry in a way that doesn't have a clean outlet. I know because I lived it and I still feel that anger sometimes, even now, even after everything that happened. The anger doesn't go away completely. What changes is what you do with it. What I did with mine was hire a very good lawyer and refuse to settle. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at Christmas. Because that's where everything began, and I think you need to understand everything that was lost before you can fully appreciate what it meant to get even one piece of it back. My name is Ryan. I grew up in a quiet suburb in Ohio, the kind of town where everybody knew everybody, where the neighbors knew your parents and your parents knew the neighbors' parents, and information moved faster than the newspaper and arrived less accurately. Our house was a modest split level with beige siding and a porch that perpetually needed repainting. My dad would notice the peeling paint every spring, say he was going to get to it, and then not get to it, and the following spring he'd notice it again. That cycle was one of the most reliable things in my life for 20 years. I didn't know until it was gone how much I'd loved it. My dad was an accountant, same firm, same desk, 15 years. My mom was a nurse at the county hospital. 12-hour shifts, always coming home just as I was leaving. Scrubs wrinkled, hair in a messy bun, tired smile, asking if I'd eaten breakfast. I was 20 years old and working part-time at Anderson's Hardware and taking classes at the community college and dating a girl named Ashley, who cut hair at a salon and mostly just wanted to sit somewhere quiet by the end of the day, which suited me perfectly. I had friends. I had Sunday dinners with my whole family every week without exception. My mom's roast chicken and mashed potatoes in winter, card games after dessert, my dad and me fixing things in the garage afterward while he handed me tools and explained what needed doing. It was a good life. Unremarkably, quietly, genuinely good. I didn't protect it carefully enough because I didn't understand yet that it needed protecting. Christmas that year was what Christmas always was in my family. The biggest day of the year, every branch of the family present. My mom cooking since the night before, the house full of noise and ham and kids and cousins. My cousin Jessica was there. A couple of years younger than me, I would have been 20, she was 17 or 18. I'd known her my whole life. We'd played in the same backyard as kids. Sat next to each other at 100 holiday dinners. She was family the way furniture is part of a room, present, familiar, unremarkable. I barely paid attention to her that day. She helped my mom in the kitchen for a while, watched a movie in the living room with the younger cousins. I carved ham with my dad, snuck Christmas cookies, drove home with a plate of leftovers, went to bed thinking about nothing. 2 days later my phone showed 12 missed calls from my mother. I was in the back room of the hardware store with my phone on silent. When I stepped outside and saw the notifications, something dropped in my stomach before my brain had caught up with why. I called her back standing in the parking lot next to the dumpster, hands already shaking. She told me Jessica had said I touched her inappropriately during Christmas. I want to let that sit. I want you to feel the specific quality of the silence that follows a sentence like that, when something so far outside the bounds of anything you were prepared to hear lands, and your brain just refuses to process it for several seconds. The parking lot continued around me. Customers walked past with shopping carts. The world kept being ordinary. And I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, understanding that my life was changing in a way I couldn't yet measure. My dad picked up on the first ring when I called him. His tone was clipped and formal, the voice of a man who has already arrived at a conclusion. He said I needed to stay away from family events for the time being. I told him it wasn't true, that nothing had happened, that I didn't know why Jessica would say that. He said we'll talk later and hung up. We never really talked. Not in any way that mattered. The fallout was immediate and total. By the end of that day, my sister had unfriended me on social media. My aunt left a cold voicemail. My manager Mike pulled me into his office with an expression I didn't need explained and told me to take some time off. I never got my hours back. Ashley showed up at my apartment a few days later, tearful and firm, said she couldn't see me anymore, and left. The following Saturday, I packed my things while my dad stood at the door with his arms crossed watching without a word. My mom came out onto the porch as I was loading the last box. She reached toward me, started to wrap her arms around me, then stopped halfway, squeezed my shoulder, said, "Take care of yourself. No, I love you. No, we'll figure this out." A shoulder squeeze and a generic send-off. They let me go like I was a problem that had been assessed and solved. The years that followed were the hardest of my life, and I want to give them the weight they deserve, because I think the people who later called me too harsh deserve to understand exactly what those years were. I found a one-bedroom apartment near the interstate, cigarette carpet in the hallway, flickering laundry room lights, walls thin enough that I went to sleep every night to the sound of my neighbors arguing. I bought a mattress off Craigslist and put it on the floor. By January, I had lost my hardware store job. Mike stopped returning calls. I picked up night shifts at a gas station. 10 at night to 6 in the morning, standing under buzzing fluorescent lights, stocking coolers and mopping floors and ringing up strangers while I tried to figure out how my entire life had been removed in a single weekend by a sentence I didn't cause and an event that never happened. Money was the organizing principle of every day. I sold my car when it broke down a second time and I couldn't afford the repairs. Walked 2 miles to work in the Ohio winter, in the snow, in boots that weren't really winter boots. Ate canned soup and frozen pizza and discount cereal. Kept the heat turned down low and slept under 3 blankets. Let dishes pile up. Wore the same clothes for days. Some nights when the silence got too heavy, I walked to the 24-hour diner 2 blocks away and sat in a corner booth with a bottomless cup of coffee watching families and couples come and go, trying to remember what it felt like to be one of those people. For nearly 3 years, that was what my life was. I'm not going to compress those years or skip over them. I think they deserve their full weight. Because the people who would later tell me I was being too harsh, those people need to understand what too harsh actually looks like. What it looks like is walking 2 miles through the snow to a gas station at 10 at night because a 17-year-old told a story that nobody questioned. The turning point came almost by accident. A flyer taped to a bus stop, warehouse hiring, full-time, benefits after 90 days. I applied on a whim and got a call a week later. I showed up Monday morning in steel-toed boots I'd bought secondhand, neon vest across my chest, and I got to work. 12-hour shifts moving pallets, running forklifts, hauling boxes until my arms trembled. Brutal in exactly the right way. The paychecks were steady and real, and with steady money came groceries that weren't just whatever was cheapest, and a bike from a yard sale for $20 that I rode to work and then past work, further and further, up hills I'd been driving past for years without knowing they were there. Shadow came into my life around that time. A scraggly gray stray near the dumpsters behind my building. One eye slightly cloudy, ribs you could count. She hissed if I got close but never ran. I left chicken scraps outside my door. Within a week she was sitting on my steps every evening when I came home. I brought her inside and named her Shadow because she followed me from room to room. For the first time since everything had happened, something was waiting for me at home. Something that needed me. I can't fully explain what that did for me without it sounding like more than it was. So I'll just say it was more than it sounds. I started writing in a cheap notebook, blue cover, $1.50 at the grocery store. I wrote down what I did each day, what I saw on the bike ride home, things Shadow did. I also started writing down memories, every detail of Christmas, every phone call, every word my father had said, everything my mother had not done on that porch. I told myself it was therapeutic. Part of it was. Part of it was something else. A habit of documentation that I didn't fully understand the purpose of until later, when it turned out to have one. By the time 3 years had passed, I had built something. Not what I had before, that was gone and I'd accepted it. Something different. A warehouse job I'd been promoted at once. A routine that held. A cat. an apartment that had started to feel like a home. I was 30 years old and had made every piece of it myself. I was not expecting to hear from my family. I had long since stopped expecting it. Then on a Wednesday evening in November, pulling off my work gloves after a late shift, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer. I did. My mother's voice, smaller than I remembered, older. She stumbled through it. Jessica had confessed, not to me, not in a letter, but at a family gathering, had broken down and admitted that she had lied. That nothing had happened. That she had been going through something personal at the time, something no one fully knew about, and had made up the story in a moment of spite and then been too frightened to take it back. So she had let it stand for 10 years while I walked through snow to a gas station and ate soup from cans. My mother said she was sorry. She said they all were. She asked if we could start fresh. I said I'd think about it and ended the call. Shadow was at the door when I got home. I filled her bowl and stood in the kitchen and breathed and waited to discover what I actually felt. What I found was not relief or rage or vindication. It was something closer to confirmation, the specific feeling of something you've known for 10 years finally being acknowledged by the people who had been denying it, which turns out to feel less like a victory and more like standing in a room that was supposed to be empty and finding a body that was there the whole time. Not shock. Just, yes, there it is. I knew. I did not call my mother back. The first thing I did the next morning was call a lawyer. I want to be clear about the sequence because the sequence matters. Before anything else, before I told anyone, before I posted anything online, before I made a single move, I called a lawyer. Because I am someone who had learned, at significant cost, what happens when you operate without documentation. I was not going to make that mistake again. Her name was Patricia. She'd been in civil litigation for 22 years and had a manner that I can only describe as methodically reassuring. She never promised anything she wasn't certain of, but the things she was certain of, she said with a calm that made you believe them. I told her everything. I sent her the notebooks where I'd been writing down memories. I told her about the confession at the family gathering and the witnesses who had heard it. I told her I wanted to sue for defamation. She said, "Before we do anything else, we need to find out what exists." That began the evidence phase. And this is the part of the story that surprised even me, because it turned out that Jessica, who had been so careful for 10 years to keep the lie intact, had not been careful about where she kept the evidence of it. Patricia's team sent formal requests, subpoenas for phone records and messages from around the time of the original accusation. Jessica's phone carrier produced records. And in those records, in a thread of text messages from the week after Christmas 10 years ago, there it was. I'm not going to quote it verbatim because I don't need to. What I will tell you is that in those messages, Jessica was texting a friend, and in that exchange she described what she had done. Not what had happened to her. What she had done. She used the word lie in a context that left no ambiguity. She described her reasoning, the jealousy, the spite, the moment of it. She described deciding to stick to the story because she'd already said it and couldn't figure out how to take it back. She talked about how the family had believed her immediately and how that had surprised her. She had texted all of this to a friend. On a phone. With a carrier that kept records. I sat in Patricia's office when she showed me the printout and I didn't say anything for a long time. Not because I was surprised. I had always known it was a lie. But seeing it printed on a page with timestamps and her name at the top, did something to me that I hadn't anticipated. It turned something abstract into something real. Something that had existed only in my memory and my notebooks and my word against hers had suddenly become a document. A piece of evidence with a life of its own, independent of what anyone believed or wanted to believe. Patricia said, "This is a very strong case." We also recovered emails. Some of them were between Jessica and her mother from around the same period, careful, circling conversations that, read in context, told their own story. Nothing as explicit as the text messages. But enough. We filed the lawsuit. The response from Jessica's family was swift and, I have to admit, slightly satisfying in the way that expected things are satisfying when they arrive on schedule. Within 3 weeks of the filing, their attorney reached out to Patricia about a settlement. They wanted to resolve it quietly. They were willing to offer a figure that was, on its face, not unreasonable. I said no. Patricia told me to think about it, not because she thought I should take it, but because she thought I should make sure I understood what I was choosing. A trial would be longer, more expensive, more public, more painful in ways that were hard to predict. The settlement would be faster, cleaner, and would include a formal acknowledgement that the accusation had been false. I said, I know. I still want the trial. She asked me why. I thought about my father at the door with his arms crossed. I thought about my mother stopping halfway through a hug. I thought about 12 missed calls in the parking lot of the hardware store and walking to work in the snow and soup from a can and everything that had been taken from me without a single person asking my side. I said, because quiet isn't what they deserve. They want quiet because quiet protects them. I want a trial because a trial is public and public is what I've been owed for 10 years. Patricia nodded slowly and said, then we're going to trial. What followed over the next several months was a legal process that I will try to describe accurately without getting lost in procedural detail, because the procedural detail is not the interesting part. The interesting part is what happened around it. Jessica's family hired a second attorney and began the stalling. That's the only word for it. Requests for additional documentation. Motions for extensions. Questions about the admissibility of evidence that had already been established as admissible. Procedural objections filed with the regularity of someone buying time and everyone in the room knowing it. Patricia handled each one efficiently and without visible frustration, though I suspect the invisible frustration was considerable. During this period of delays and motions and extensions, while Jessica's family was doing everything they could to keep the trial from happening, I started talking. I had made a decision early on, with Patricia's guidance about what was and wasn't legally safe to share, to put the truth into the world while the legal process unfolded. Not in a chaotic or reckless way, carefully, methodically, with documentation attached wherever possible. I wrote the account, the full one, from Christmas to the parking lot to the boxes in the driveway to the gas station to now. I posted it in the community forums and local groups where people from my hometown gathered online. I sent it personally to people who had known me, former classmates, former co-workers from the hardware store, people who had heard the original story and believed it and never had reason to question it. I also, at the moment that was legally appropriate, shared the text messages. Not all of them. Patricia was precise about what could be publicly shared without compromising the case. But enough. The exchange where Jessica used the word lie. The context that made the intent clear. I put those into the world with the account, and I let people read them. The response was what it was. In my hometown, people talk. They always have. The original story had moved through that town in days, neighbor to neighbor, family to family, through every channel available. The truth moved the same way just a decade later and in the opposite direction. People who had heard the original story read the new one and the text messages and drew their own conclusions. People reached out to me, some with apologies, some with anger at Jessica that I hadn't asked for and didn't direct, some with a kind of quiet acknowledgement that something had been wrong for a long time. And some people, in the way of small towns and communities and groups of people who decide collectively that something has crossed a line, express themselves in ways that had nothing to do with me. I heard that someone had spray-painted something across the front of Jessica's family's house. I heard that her car had been keyed in the parking lot of the grocery store. I heard about other incidents targeted, specific, the kind of thing that happens when a community decides someone has broken a social contract and has suffered no visible consequence for it. Every time someone asked me what I knew about any of it, I said the same thing. I have no idea what you're talking about. I went to bed those nights and slept fine. The depositions were something I want to describe in some detail because they were the part of the process I found most interesting to observe. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that accumulates in a person who is maintaining a lie under legal pressure, and by the time we reached depositions, Jessica and her family had been maintaining theirs or trying to for months. The text messages had already been established in evidence. The emails had been cataloged. The confession at the family gathering had been documented through witness statements. The architecture of the lie, which had been allowed to stand unchallenged for 10 years, had been systematically dismantled in legal filings. What was left in the deposition room was the people who'd built it. I watched Jessica in those sessions with an attention I couldn't entirely explain. She was 30 years old now. I had last seen her clearly at 17 or 18, At a Christmas dinner where I hadn't paid much attention to her. She looked tired in a way that went beyond the room. The kind of tired that settles into someone who has been carrying a weight for a decade and knows the weight is about to be put down in the worst possible way. Her answers were careful and slow. She kept her eyes on the table more than on anyone else. There were moments in the deposition, moments when a document was placed in front of her, or when a question was asked that required her to account for something she couldn't account for cleanly, where something moved across her face that I recognized. It was the face of a person who knew it was over. Her parents were worse. Her father had the particular quality of a man who has been convinced by someone he loves that a story is true and has organized his beliefs around that story for 10 years, and is now watching the story disassemble in front of him in a conference room with a court reporter typing everything anyone says. He looked older than he should have. He answered questions carefully, but there was a heaviness in it. A sense of a man measuring every word because he was no longer certain what was safe to say. Her mother cried during her deposition. Not dramatically, quietly, the tears arriving without apparent permission. She wiped them away and kept answering questions. At one point, during a break in proceedings, Jessica's attorney pulled Patricia aside. I was close enough to hear the edges of it. They were asking again about settlement. A higher figure this time. Considerably higher. They wanted to end it. Patricia came to me during the break. She laid it out. The new number, the terms, what it would mean to accept. I said no. I want the verdict. She looked at me for a moment and then nodded and went back. There was one deposition session where Jessica's attorney asked me directly, with a formality that suggested the question had been discussed at length before being asked, whether I had any knowledge of or involvement in the vandalism and harassment that had been directed at Jessica and her family during the period since the lawsuit was filed. I looked at him steadily. I said, I have no knowledge of and no involvement in any such incidents. He watched me for a moment. I watched him back. He moved on to the next question. The trial lasted 4 days. I won't give you every detail because 4 days of legal proceedings is a lot of detail and most of it is not interesting unless you're the person in the room. What I will tell you is that the text messages were read aloud in open court. The emails were submitted and entered into the record. Jessica's confession at the family gathering was described by 3 people who had been present. The documented losses, my employment, my relationships, my years of reduced circumstances, the professional and personal cost of having a false accusation attached to your name in a town where everyone knows everyone, were presented methodically and completely. Jessica took the stand. Her attorney had prepared her well and she held together better than I expected for most of it. But there are questions you can't prepare for when the documentation is as complete as ours was. There are moments when a question requires you to account for something that has no clean accounting, and in those moments, the best preparation in the world isn't enough. The jury was out for a day and a half. The verdict was in my favor. The damages were $1.3 million. I want to let that number sit there for a moment. Not because I want to brag, but because I want you to understand what that number meant, both to me and to them. For me, it was transformative in a way I hadn't let myself anticipate because anticipating it felt like tempting fate. It meant the end of counting things. The end of checking my account before buying groceries. The end of the particular mental overhead of being someone for whom money is a constant low-level emergency. I put a significant portion into savings and investments. I paid off debts. I moved into a different apartment, not extravagant, but clean and bright and mine in a way the old one never quite managed to be. I kept the furniture I'd accumulated from thrift stores because I'd earned every piece of it and I liked it. Shadow got a new cat bed. She ignored it in favor of sleeping on my feet, which felt right. For Jessica and her family, $1.3 million meant something very different. They were not wealthy people. They had not been doing well financially before any of this began. The legal fees from a multi-month trial had already strained them significantly. The judgment on top of that was, by any honest assessment, devastating. Houses were involved. Savings were involved. Plans that had existed for years stopped existing. Jessica, I was told through the information network of a small town, was now working 2 jobs. A day job and an evening job, both hourly, both unglamorous, both of which she would be working for a very long time to address what the verdict had created. I am not going to tell you I felt nothing about that. I am going to tell you what I actually felt, which was something I'm still working to describe accurately. Not satisfaction exactly, not cruelty, but something in the territory of proportion. Of things being appropriately sized. Of a decade of consequences finally being matched by a decade of accountability. When people called me after the verdict, and people called family members and mutual connections and people who had followed the case locally, a number of them said some version of the same thing. That the amount was extreme. That it was more than was necessary. That I had what I needed and should have taken the settlement and let it be done. And every single time I said the same thing. Harsh? You want to talk to me about Harsh? Harsh is your father standing in the driveway watching you carry 20 years of your life to your car without offering to help. Harsh is your mother reaching toward you and then stopping halfway. Harsh is walking to work in the snow at 20 years old because your car broke down and you couldn't afford to fix it. Harsh is the gas station at 2 in the morning and the soup from the can and the 3 blankets and the silence of a phone that nobody was calling. Harsh is being accused of something you didn't do and having every single person who was supposed to know you decide in a weekend, without asking you a single question, that they didn't know you at all. A lawsuit verdict is a number on a page. Don't talk to me about Harsh. Nobody had an answer. The calls stopped. There was one more thing I heard in the months after the verdict. Through the same network that had brought me news of the vandalism and the 2 jobs and the ongoing financial difficulty, I heard that Jessica had reached a very low point. That she had, in the dark of that time, done something that frightened her family and had survived it. I heard this and I sat with it. I want to describe what I found when I looked for my reaction honestly. Not for drama, not to perform something, but because I think honesty about this is part of the whole story. What I found was a kind of emptiness that I didn't entirely expect. Not satisfaction. Not relief. Not guilt either, though I searched for it. Just blank. The particular blankness of a tank that has been completely drained. For 10 years I had carried feelings about Jessica. Anger and grief and disbelief and the specific exhaustion of being wronged by someone who was supposed to be family. And by the time the verdict came in and everything that followed landed, I had simply run out. The tank was empty. There was nothing left in it. I didn't reach out. I had nothing to say. My family made a final attempt. A handwritten letter. My mother's cursive on 2 pages. Describing Sunday dinners and my sister's kids and how much had changed and how much they missed me. My dad's block letters on a 3rd page, shorter, saying he was sorry, that he should have believed me, that he wanted to be my father again. I read the letter twice. I thought about the driveway. About his arms crossed. His eyes fixed somewhere past my shoulder. About we'll talk later and then a click and then 10 years. I thought about my mother stopping halfway through a hug like I might contaminate her. I thought about the specific loneliness of being the only person in the world who knew with absolute certainty that the story was a lie, and carrying that certainty alone for a decade while everyone around me organized their lives around the fiction. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I have not responded. I don't know if I will. Not because I want them to suffer. What they will carry from this is already decided and does not require my participation. But because forgiveness, real forgiveness, the kind that means something rather than just performing something, requires trust. And trust requires a reason proportionate to the thing that broke it. I haven't found a reason that proportionate. Maybe I will. I'm in no hurry. Here is where I am now. My apartment is not the bunker it once was. I have a bookshelf with real books. A kitchen I keep clean. Shadow's permanent impression in the couch cushion where she claimed her spot the first winter and has not moved from it since. I have been promoted again at the warehouse. I run a team now, which I am better at than I expected, probably because I understand what it means to be the person on the floor who nobody notices. I have savings. Real savings, the kind that mean unexpected things don't send your heart rate through the roof. I have a few friends made slowly and with care, the kind that hold. I have a life that I built myself. Not the life I imagined at 20. A different one. Harder in some ways. Clearer in almost every way. I know exactly who I am and exactly what I'm capable of because I've been tested in ways that most people aren't, and I came through. Not cleanly. Not without cost. Through. Nobody gave me any of it. And somewhere across town, Jessica is getting off her second shift and going home to a situation that is smaller and harder than the one she had before she decided, on a winter day when she was 17 years old and feeling something I'll never fully understand, to tell a story about me that wasn't true. I didn't do that to her. She did that to herself. I just made sure the world got to see it clearly. If this one stayed with you, and I think it did, you know what to do. Subscribe to the Story Zone, drop a like, and tell me in the comments. Was there a moment where you thought Ryan went too far? Or was every single step exactly proportionate? I want to know where you land on this one. We'll see you in the next one.